Hello friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All, and today we continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession in the chapter Obsession Technique. And in this chapter we will see the continuation of the obsession meeting between the obsessor Guilherme and Mariana, who was Aldegundis in a past life, where Aldegundis was wife of Guilherme, and she ran away from her marriage with a lover, Jacob, who in this present life was the father of Mariana. So this is the triangle that we will see in this chapter. Saturnino, who was the spiritual benefactor, Ambrosio, the incarnate benefactor, the leader of the spiritual meeting, are helping the obsessor and the obsessed to understand what the real situation. So Saturnino asked Ambrosio to apply magnetic resources of energy to Mariana's coronary and cerebral centers in order to awaken her sleeping past on the screen of her memory. Activated chakras through the skillfully applied energy transfusions. In Brazil we call this process a passes, or it's a Portuguese word. The patient, partially disconnected to the physical body by physical sleep, seemed to suffer a delirium and then changed her expression, similarly to someone who wakes up after a long sleep, in which cruel nightmares had become of destructive proportions. Chakra is a Sanskrit word meaning will. Spiritual author notes. From the momentary uneasiness she became with a madness aspect, through which words flowed sometimes in Mariana's language, which is Portuguese, sometimes in Aldegund's language, which would be the Dutch language, to establish herself in the words in which Aldegundis expressed. Seeming to recognize Guilherme, the vigorous pursuer, she shivered, looking at him dazedly, as if she wanted to run away. Then she slowly transfigured herself to the physiognomic features of the Hellenian she was on the past. The signs of the madness that had taken her in the last days of her physical existence became visible. From her initial lack of control, she went on to mortification, freeing herself from Dona Rosa's welcoming arms and throwing herself at the feet of her former husband, begging his forgiveness in piercing, agonized appeals. Hearing her lucid like she was in her last life, Guilherme acquired a displeasure expression of scathingly rejected her. I was desperate, she justified tearfully, when I ran away from our home. Forgive me, you don't know what I suffered, and I still suffer, in the dungeon where I now live, referring to Mariana's body. There is an unidentifiable pain in my soul, and a dark night of horror follows me without respite. I cannot cry for ignoring the reason for the sufferings when the invisible daggers of justice reach me. Only a heavy revolt shackles me to an irrepressible desire to die, to disappear, to lose consciousness forever. This, replied her former companion, is only the beginning of the plight that awaits you. Now, yes, you will shed the tears of reparation till when, satiated, I may consider myself capable of observing your indignity without limit. Saturnino, Ambrosio, and the other spiritual advisors, although in an alert attitude, immersed in healthy thoughts, allowed the two entities to meet again for a moment through a painful and sore dialogue, which, however, would open the doors to better spiritual treatment. I ran away from home and I recognize my crime. But you ignore the punishment I experienced right after. I was never loved, not by you, not by him, not by her husband, and by her lover. In your hands, I was nothing but a pack animal and an object of vain emotions. In his hands, I was no more than a vessel of violent desires. Of course, the cloud of illusion only later let me see the abyss, and it was too late. Then I came back. So Guilherme asked, "Have you had the misfortune of returning to Harlem?" roared the scorned husband. "Did you by any chance find the undue punishment you imposed on me insufficient to the point of returning to the places where we were known? What did you want, crazy woman?" So he was asking her to explain why she came back, because at Harlem everyone knew that she left him to live a new life with her lover. But she suffered so much in the hands of Jacob that he returned to the home that she had in the past. "I wanted to beg your pardon. I who still guessed you loved me. Loving you when you ruined my life? Did you suppose that dishonor could be washed away with tears? Here we see how women, if women are still badly treated by men, by husbands, by boyfriends, imagine at that time when this story happened, centuries ago. Women were treated almost like something that a man could own. It was very sad, the situation. Nothing, I supposed. I expected pity and compassion, a piece of your land to succumb among the tulips that I myself had planted, and in whose fields we had obtained the unicolid specimens of Gesnerianas, Clusianas, Turcisas, torn by homesickness and remorse, like a castaway. I cherished the tenuous possibility of salvation. She was asked for his forgiveness. You were unaware, of course, that ashamed and wounded, I fled, unable to die. Adding to my misfortune, not infrequently demonic forces placed me at your side and at the side of the soulless thief to torment me with the limitless hallucination vision. How I hate you, how I despise you. It's impossible, infamous woman, any attempt to. Do you deny me, then, every today, one drop of mercy? Aldegundis asked. And who are you, if not the most responsible person for my unhappiness? How dare you hurt me with your mockery, your hatred? Yes, I hate you too. Let me tell you how I hated you before and I didn't know it. You never gave me the opportunity to love. You traded my life with my parents, considering my youth and my health, and no one, not you or they, ever tried to find out if I had a heart of nourished a girl's dream. So, guess the situation. She was traded as if she were an animal between her fathers and her husband, and he never gave love to her. She was like more a possession than a wife. And sobbing in a moving state, she went on. Lover of money, Guilherme, you wanted nothing more than anything that constituted a means of possessing more. You made me unequal to your employees in the endless rows of bulbs among the tulip beds. And then, however, I found a slight happiness. In its petals I discovered the miracle of life, the beauty and the color that you stole from me. And then what? Much older than me, our ages with almost 30 years of difference, you turned to be nothing but a cruel executioner. So he was much older. He didn't give love to her. She was just a possession to him. And so the drama continues. Don't try to justify yourself, unhappy woman, he cried, apoplectic. I will bring you the truth now, telling you what I never dared to show you before. Yes, I will tell you. You were and you are still ambitious and cold. When you demanded to Leiden and then to Amsterdam to negotiate with the government many lands that would come from the drying of the lake, leaving me alone among your employees and your friends, you did not take care of me. You made me the inspector of your goods, the servant who inspected the other servants. You hired Jacob, who had just arrived from the first Gulf guests, used to working on the wall. The Gulf referred to is Zuiderzee, which in this century was largely drained and desiccated, become arable land Geest, being Geest is in Netherlands language, being almost replaced in the last 40 years in 4 dusters. The wall is one of the waterways on the Rhine, where there is a village with the same name. A note from the spiritual author. So Jacob arrived, and who, as a young man like me, touched my heart, since I lived in constant solitude. I was very reluctant between fidelity to your abandonment and the solitude of happiness. Poor woman. The suffering entity could not continue. The stormy evocations distressed her. After a pause, she continued, to the expectation of Guilherme, who seemed to feel foolish listening to the information she was disclosing to him. We fled to Amsterdam, but I never ran away from myself. In the early days, still dominated by the passion that had blinded me, I managed to overcome the remorse. Then I awoke, abandoned 6 months later in the city, in a miserable condition of contempt among unhappy women of the port. She became a prostitute. So Jacob robbed her from her marriage, fooled her, used her, and left alone in Amsterdam, where she had nothing to do. She had to survive, and she became a prostitute. Jacob have left me, him who had never had any affection for me, fled to Belgium after having eluded me, never returning. Do you understand what happened to me? And that's not all. After wandering in the most stupid misery, not enduring the humiliations that were beyond my strength, I remembered the flowering fields and the generous land. I came back and looked for you, and then I realized that had passed only a few years, but due to my conditions, I wasn't even recognized by the old neighbors. Informed of the tragedy I had caused, I went mad, and in a frantic state, through the streets of Harlem, I was thrown to the asylum, like an animal in a cage, where I drank for long years my own misery, until death freed me, just to feel immersed in a much greater pain. In my madness, I saw you in agony, cursing me, chasing me. Do you see now? It's all your fault, your selfishness. Yes, I was connected to you without knowing it. And you never met Jacob again? Asked Guilherme. Never. If I found him, what wouldn't I do with this other tormentor of mine? Well, I tell you, you live with him again. You are his daughter. Up to now, Mariana didn't know who was really, spiritually speaking, her father. Daughter, don't talk nonsense. By what spell could the enemy take my father's body? Don't make fun of me. Listen, Aldegundis, replied Guilherme. You've died and came back to life. That's the truth. Guilherme showed in his voice all his contempt. Soon after he continued, God, who is justice, has made him your father, uniting the two of them so that I can now take my revenge. Do you see why you don't run away from me in repair? You won't run away from me in repair? Mateus, who is your father, Mariana's father, in whose body you live as a prisoner, is your ex-lover and the cause of my unhappiness, reunited again. Now I can. At that moment Saturnino rested his right hand on Mariana's forehead, who was overcome by memories of the past, and using his magnetic resources, slowly made her fall asleep. Guilherme, stunned, began to claim violently, while Ambrosio helped him, reducing his field of action. That was enough. Guilherme had already explained his side of the story. Mariana could remember as Aldegundes all the story and telling Guilherme. So let's see what happens next. Inviting Dona Rosa, the benefactor returned her the anesthetized daughter, who was in restful sleep. Ambrosio was called to take the group back to the home of the Soares family, where the matron, the mother, and her two daughters were taken by the benefactor and an assistant. The spiritual service, however, continued its normal course. Following the altercation between the two antagonists of the past, Saturnino managed to sensitize Guilherme, who then related the experiences that were supposed to culminate that night in the opposite way of what was happening. Then he narrated that for over 15 years he had felt connected to Mr. Mateus, the former executioner for whom he had an unknown aversion, and was willing to follow him. He was transferred permanently to the home of the Soares family, joining the group of irresponsible entities that made their home there. So see how the thought is powerful. The minds are powerful. We see Guilherme that committed suicide due to the shame because he was abandoned by his wife that ran away with the lover Jacob. He didn't know that Jacob was incarnate as Guilherme, as Mr. Mateus. He didn't know, but he felt attracted by Mr. Mateus. He didn't like, but didn't know why there was that unknown aversion. And he was brought to Soares' home. Particularly and unconsciously linked to the responsible for the clan, Mr. Mateus, he slowly managed to infiltrate in him bitter reminiscences that made him flee from home to surrender more and more to gambling, seeking to escape. Mariana had just been born, and although he didn't know that she was the reincarnation of Aldegundes, when he met her, he was overcome by an irrepressible antipathy. His horror for Mr. Mateus was also unconscious, as he ignored the process of returning to the body in which he was hidden. So, the obsessor, up to that moment, Guilherme, didn't know the process of incarnation. So he disliked Mr. Mateus and Mariana very much, but he didn't know that they were Jacob and Aldegundis, her wife and the ex-lover of his ex-wife. Living together with other assassins in the family group, because there were lots of evil spirits in Soares' home, because Marta, you see why that happens. Let's proceed here, you understand. Living together with other assassins in the family group, he soon became friend of a terrible obsessor linked to Marta, the eldest daughter of the family, who was dedicated to incursions into the dark strongholds of black magic. And informing him of her purposes, he was clarified about the reincarnation, by which he made sure he was on the trail of his enemies. Then came the desire to kill them immediately. Informed of the idea, Marta's inspirer suggested that he should make contact with Dr. Theophrastus so that he could examine his problem and, according to the interests that aroused him, to take or not the revenge project under his responsibility. So when Guilherme knew that Marta, Mariana and Dr. Mateus, her father, were his enemies, he wanted to kill them because he didn't know about the reincarnation process, and now he was clarified about reincarnation. So he wanted to kill them, but the evil obsessor that became his friend suggested, go to an expert, Dr. Theophrastus. He will orient you how to make a better revenge. That's the question. According to the informant, Dr. Theophrastus had been a distinguished Greek magician when on earth, then residing in France. He was burned by the Inquisition around the year 1470 in Rouen after merciless and nefarious persecution. Deeply knowledgeable, even when incarnate, of some of the laws of the spiritual world, he allowed himself to be consumed by the hatred for his tormentors. As soon as he discarnate, he formed ties with terrible avengers from beyond, already linked to him by his necromantic sorcery practices and Sabbath meetings, all of them carried out under the inspiration of vigorous and unhappy minds of the spiritual sphere. Soon he identified himself after the death of the physical body at the stake by those through whom he maintained the psychic commerce. He became noticed by his impiety in the tormenting thirst for revenge. Gradually he managed to magnetize himself to several of those whom he and many others had unduly punished, in an unspeakable obsessive spiritual exchange, which he became to indulge himself. Bearer of tenacious mind, he saw through the time's supremacy in the group in which he lived, passing to the position of chief. Living, clarified Guilherme, in a strange place in the lower regions of the planet, Dr. Theophrastus has commanded with other assassins for over 3 centuries hordes of ferocious entities many of them responsible for long-term obsessive and calamitous processes among human creatures, who let themselves be overcome by the warps of their tormenting minds. Many of those who periodically rebel have experienced severe punishments under his mental pincers, producing in them regrettable transformations in their perispirits, in terrifying processes of zoanthropy by anesthetizing hypnosis in the deep centers of the soul, such as lycanthropy, etc. So you can see that Dr. Theophrastus was a real evil entity. As a true devil, he believes to be a lord of the vast dark region where he reigns as a bitter autocrat. After a few days of anticipation in which he awaited the entity's decision, the ex-Dutchman's report continued. He was taken to the presence of the chief. Guilherme was taken to the presence of Dr. Theophrastus. Heard attentively by the former magus, he agreed to examine the problem, setting a favorable date for a new interview, which took place a week later. On that occasion, the insidious and singular monarch spoke to him of his discarnation as suicidal, clarifying his horrid concerns, detailing his discarnation and reincarnation processes in order to explain him what had happened to his executioners from the past, now living in a new body. Elucidated by Guilherme, as he wanted an immediate effort which would translate all his bitterness. Dr. Theophrastus then explained to him that the best way to get the revenge would be achieved through time, by the slow process of continuous obsession over the partners of the past tragedy, inducing them at the right moment to commit suicide to increase their affliction. Linking himself immediately and spontaneously to those commanded by Dr. Theophrastus, he received safe and constant guidance from him, managing to get fed up with the vampirized emanations coming from the young obsessed woman who he had begun to subjugate, while and simultaneously hallucinating the mater father, now broken. So Dr. Theophrastus recommended a long time revenge. Realizing that the moment of the decisive blow had arrived, Dr. Theophrastus had guided him to provoke scenes of constant friction between father and daughter, so that in a moment of despair she escaped from home, looking to the frivolous and irresponsible boyfriend for false protection that he would feel lacking. In this circumstance, then, he would reincarnate through Mariana, returning to the home of Soares as Mr. Mateus' grandson, in order to kill him slowly, in a long recourse to a merciless revenge as instructed. This would be easy for him, of course, by the hypnosis in the girl he was able to produce, as he had tried achieving success in the first. So, the long-term revenge would be Guilherme reborn as Mr. Mateus' grandson, the son of Mariana, and the father would be the boyfriend that was just wanting sex, and as grandson he could cause pain to his mother and his grandfather, causing them so much pity, so much pain, that they would be led to commit suicide. That was the plan of Dr. Theophrastus. Consecutively, as he recalled all the movies of the unhappy program that he had cherished for many years, Guilherme presented himself disturbed by the pains of the dark evocations and by the immense frustration of the plans elaborated with such care. Although intervening from time to time in order to stimulate him in the narrative, Saturnino encouraged him with generous words, so that he could become aware of one of the countless techniques of obsession and the usable resources for revenge by the discarnate, beginning then a more pleasant conversation with Mariano's pursuer, who seemed broken, defeated, under the magnetic influence of the benefactor, and the energy transfusions, passes, in a Portuguese word, applied with affection by Ambrosio, so they could reach him energetically. Led to sleep, Guilherme was removed from the precinct by zealous discarnate co-workers, and the meeting was terminated after a moving prayer uttered by the benefactor. Petitinga, Nemésio Moraes, and us, the author, Manoel Philomeno, were brought back home, while the dawning drew the first outlines of nature over the fleeting shadows of the night, preparing for the festival of a new day. Thank you very much for watching us. Sorry the video got too long, but I couldn't break this story in the middle. Next chapter, studying hypnotism. Thank you very much for watching us. If you liked the video, please subscribe, leave us your like, leave us your comment if you want, and share the video with your friends. See you.